They brought back a boot. That is what I want you to sit with before anything else. Not a body, not a coffin. A boot and half a leather glove, and a wedding ring that a man named Otway found 60 feet down the slide path on the third day of digging. He cleaned that ring on his coat before he handed it over. I have always thought it was the kindest thing anybody did that whole spring. March of 1884. The snow came off the north face of Bittercress Ridge at first light, and took 4 men. They found 3. So we buried a boot. Now hold on to that, because 11 months later, I was lying in my own bed under everything I owned with my boots on, and I had stopped being frightened. That is the part nobody tells you. You stop being frightened. It goes quiet, and it goes almost warm, and you get very interested in going to sleep. And the woman who came through my door and hauled the covers off me was the same woman who stood at that grave in March, with a face dry as August. 30 of us watched her that day, not a tear on her, not one. Cold, we decided, standing on a hillside in the wind, with a baby screaming on her hip, and her little sister hanging on her sleeve. That girl is cold. We said it in kitchens, we said it at the store, and we were wrong for 11 months, every last one of us, at the same time, about the same person. Then the storm came, and every soul in Little Bear Creek found out exactly how wrong. My name is Cordelia Mabry. Cordy to anybody who has ever needed me at 2 in the morning, which in that valley was most everybody. I was 64 years old the spring they buried that boot. I had put a husband in the ground already and 2 sisters, and I will not tell you how many babies because I know their weights and their names, and I do not hand those out to strangers. 40 Montana winters by then. I am 86 now. It is the autumn of 1906, and my hands shake, and I have got maybe 1 more winter in me, and there is only ever one I tell about. Let me start with the funeral, since I brought it up. Pastor Sowell stood up on that hillside, and the wind took his words and threw them somewhere out toward Idaho. Nobody heard a syllable. It did not matter. We all knew the words already. And in the middle of it stood Marit Ashby, 22 years old. Dark blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. A baby 4 months old, howling in the cold. Her sister beside her 15, holding on to her sleeve like a child, half that age. I watched Ruth Pell look at Alma Teague. I saw that look pass between them like a plate handed across a table. Here is what nobody in that graveyard knew. She had cried already. She had done it in the barn, on the second night with her face pressed into the neck of a mare that did not care to be cried on. She did it the way you do it when you have been holding something up a long time and the arms finally go. 16 minutes, maybe. Ugly. Loud. Nothing pretty about it. Then she stopped. Nils needed feeding. Solveig needed telling. And there was nobody else on this earth to tell her. The way you tell a 15-year-old girl that the last man who ever took care of her is under 9 feet of snow. Is you sit her down and you look at her and you say it plain and you do not fall apart while you do it. Which Marit did not. So by the time we got around to the burying, she was empty. That is the thing folks never understand about grief. It does not run on the county's schedule. It comes when it comes, and it goes when it goes, and nobody consults you first. She stood at that grave and thought about the roof. God help her, that is the truth. Her husband was in the ground, and she was standing there in a black wool dress that had belonged to her mother, and what was running through her mind was the south pitch, where the shakes had gone soft the summer before, and Everett kept saying he would get to it. He had not got to it. There was nobody now who was going to. That is not a cold thought. I want to be very clear. That is not a cold thought. That is a woman doing arithmetic while her heart is still on the floor. October came early that year. The aspens turned in the second week of September and dropped by the 20th. The geese went over 3 weeks ahead of themselves. Old Silas Renner stood outside the store and said we were in for it, and everybody laughed at him because Silas said that every single autumn of his life. That year he was right. By the 1st of October, there was ice on the horse trough at sunup. By the 10th, the frost was not burning off till near noon. And down at that little cabin by the creek, something was going wrong that had nothing to do with the sky. The Ashby place sat on cedar posts. 6 inches of daylight between the ground and the floor joists. That is good building. That is how you keep the sills out of the wet. And Everett had done it right. He had done most things right. But 6 inches is open all the way around. When the wind came down the draw at night, it went under that house like water goes under a bridge. Marit felt it first in her feet. She would stand at the stove with the fire going good, and her face would be warm and her hands would be warm, and from the ankles down she may as well have been standing in the creek. Then she noticed the floorboards. How you could lay your palm flat on them in the morning and feel the cold coming up through the wood like something breathing. Then the frost. That was the one that frightened her. Middle of October she got up before light to build the fire, and there was frost on the inside of the floor. Little white feathers of it in the gaps between the boards growing up out of the floor of her own house. She stood there in her stocking feet a long while. This house does not hold heat, she thought. This house passes heat through the way a sieve passes water. And it has been doing it all along, and I never knew because he was here, and there was always more wood. Solveig started coughing around the 18th. Nothing much at first. A scratch at the back of it. The kind of cough you hear in every schoolroom in America come November, and nobody thinks twice. It did not clear. It went down deeper instead, moved out of her throat and into her chest, and settled in there like a boarder who does not intend to pay. And by the end of the month, she was waking 3 and 4 times a night. And the sound of it in that little cabin was like somebody dragging a chair across the floor in the dark. And Nils, a year old that November, just up on his feet, holding chair legs, doing that wobbling drunk sailor walk they do. Marit picked him up one morning and his fingertips were white. Not pink, not red. White the color of candle wax and cool when she put them against her lip. She sat down on the floor with him in her lap and rubbed those hands between her palms until the color came back. It took about 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Inside the house. With the fire going. She tried everything. I want that said before anybody in that valley ever breathed a word about her being strange. She tried every single thing that had ever worked for anybody. She packed straw under the floor, bale after bale on her hands and knees, crawling in that 6-inch gap, with her hair full of chaff stuffing it tight between the joists. The wind took it in 9 days. She could see it out in the sagebrush after little yellow tufts caught on the branches for 200 yards. Downwind, like the whole thing had been a joke. Somebody was playing on her. So she hung canvas, nailed it right around the foundation. Old wagon sheet doubled banked with dirt at the bottom. It held. It actually held for a while, until the first real blow on the 29th of October. The wind got up under one corner and worked it the way a child works, a loose tooth. And by morning, half of it was gone, and the rest was cracking like a whip. And she had to go out at 4 in the morning in her nightdress and cut it down before it took the shingles with it. So she burned more wood. That is the answer everybody gives you. Every man in that valley, if you had asked him about a cold house, would have told you the same 3 words. Burn more wood. She burned through October's pile by the 7th of November. sat down on the chopping block with a pencil and the back of a flour sack, and did the numbers. The numbers said she was out around the middle of January. Middle of January. In a country where winter does not even get serious until February. She looked at that flour sack a long time. Then she folded it into her apron pocket and went inside and made cornmeal mush for supper. And she never said one word about it to her sister. Now I have to tell you about the tin box, because this is where the ground opened up under that girl, and it was not the weather that did it. Second week of November, and she was going through Everett's things. She had put it off since March. Everybody puts it off. And she was doing it now for a hard, plain reason, which was that she was hunting for anything she could sell. His good coat, his razor, the pocket watch, if it still ran. Down at the bottom of his trunk under the coat was a tin box about the size of a Bible. She had never seen it before. Now think about that. In a two-room cabin, there is no place for a thing you have never seen before. The lid stuck. She worked it with her thumbs. Papers. She sat down on the floor and read them. Then she read them again because the first time through she was certain she had it wrong. It could not possibly say what it appeared to say. A mortgage note. Drawn on the cabin, the outbuilding and the 4 acres. Executed the 22nd of September, 1883. Held by Horace Wickstrom, proprietor, Wickstrom and Son, General Merchandise, Little Bear Creek, Montana Territory. 11 months before the slide. Marit Ashby had put their house up. $240 against it, with a schedule of payments on the second sheet in Wickstrom's neat little clerk's hand, and a date at the bottom of the column. April the 1st, 1885. Balance due in full. Marit sat on that floor with the light going amber through the west window, and the whole thing came apart in her head at once. She remembered September of 1883. She remembered it well because she was 7 months gone with Niels. She remembered Everett coming home in the wagon one evening, looking gray around the mouth, and she had asked him what was wrong, and he said the horse threw a shoe. And she had believed him. Why on earth would she not? Now she was sitting there holding the reason, with his signature on it. Here is the part I hate. The part she told 2 people in her life, and I was one of them. Her first feeling was not grief. It was fury. 8 months a widow sitting on that floor. And the first thing that came up in her was pure, hot rage. At a dead man. You didn't tell me. You put the roof over our son's head on a table and pushed it across, and you did not tell me. And right behind it, because that is exactly how it works, right behind it came the shame. You are not supposed to be angry at the dead. He had gone up on that ridge in March to cut timber for money. The reason he needed money was sitting in her hands. He died trying to fix a thing he was too proud to say out loud, which made it worse, which made it so much worse. She folded the papers back into the tin box and put the box in the cupboard behind the flour. Then she went and stood outside in the cold with her arms crossed and looked at that little cabin. Pine logs, stone chimney, thin smoke going straight up in the still air. 5 months, she thought. 5 months to find $240 in a valley where nobody has 40. And in the meantime, I have got to keep 2 children alive in a house that eats wood the way a stove eats paper. Then she thought something else, and this is where all of it turns, so listen. The cold is not coming through the walls. She had known it for weeks without letting it be a thought. Her hands were warm at the stove. Her face was warm. Those walls were 3 feet of good chinked pine, and they did their job. It was the floor. It was always the floor. It was the 6 inches of open dark underneath, where the wind ran all night long, hauling heat out from under her family, the way a creek hauls silt. The enemy was underneath. And once she let herself think that word, something came up out of a very old place. She did not want it. She fought it 2 days. She lost. Her father's trunk was under the bed. Torvald Halvorsen, stone mason, came over from Telemark in the spring of 1856 with a chest of tools and 11 words of English. He learned 400 more and never did lose the rest of Norway out of his mouth. He died in the winter of '82. Her mother had gone 4 years ahead of him. That left Marit 20 years old with a sister of 13 and no plan and no people. She married Marit Ashby that same year. I have heard folks in this valley say that girl married for a roof. I have heard it in my own kitchen, and I have shown people the door for it. But I will tell you honestly that Marit wondered about it herself sometimes late in the dark. That wondering was one more stone she carried that nobody ever saw. She pulled the trunk out and knelt down and opened it. Wool, his pipe, a hymnal in Norwegian with the spine gone soft. And underneath all of it, wrapped in oilcloth, a book. Not a book, really. A ledger. Cheap pasteboard cover gone the color of weak tea, every page filled with his hand drawings, notes, figures, little cramped columns of Norwegian. She sat back on her heels and opened it across her knees. There they were. Cross sections, room shapes drawn in careful pencil, roofed with sod, walled with laid stone, cut down into a hill or down under a floor. Arrows for the air. Numbers running down the side in feet and inches. A page on drainage. A page on how to lay a dry stone wall so it leans back into the earth instead of standing up straight against it. Because the earth is always pushing, and a wall that stands up straight to the earth is a wall that is already falling. Jordhus, he had written across the top of the first one. Earth House. She could hear him say it. 20 years gone, and she could hear it. The way the J came out like a Y. The way he said it soft and matter-of-fact, like it was nothing, like it was just how people built. She was 9 years old the first time he took her out to a cut bank on the Kittredge place and made her put her hand flat on the raw face of it. Feel, he said. Down here it is not October, and it was not. Cold up top and the ground at the bottom of that cut just steady. Not warm, steady. Like something that had made up its mind a long while back and was not going to be argued out of it. She turned the pages faster. All of it was here. The depth. The stone. How to key a wall into a corner. Pine bark and needles packed in behind the stone against the raw earth. Ventilation run up through the foundation on an angle where it would look like nothing at all. Like a drain. Like a piece of pipe somebody forgot in 1879. Her hands were shaking, and she did not notice. Then she came to the tear. Between page 19 and page 20. A page cut out with a knife close into the binding, so close that all that was left was a 1/4-inch stub with the tails of a few pencil strokes on it. Cut, not torn in anger. Cut. And Marit Halvorsen, Ashby, sat down flat on the floor because her legs had quit. She remembered. She was 13. August of 1875. Hot. A woman screaming somewhere out past the Fossum place and men running. Her father had built a root cellar for the Fossums that spring. Good work. He was proud of it. Deep, stone-lined, cool as a church in July. And the Fossum boy, Anton, 7 years old gap, where his front teeth were coming in. Anton went down in there on a hot afternoon to get out of the sun and fell asleep on the cool floor. The vent was one pipe, which is enough to let air out or enough to let air in. It is not enough to make air move. A closed room with people in it does not need air sitting still. It needs air walking through. They found him at supper time. Her father came home and did not say anything. He went out to the shed and stayed out there till dark and past it. And her mother sent Marit with a plate, and that girl stood in the doorway and saw her father sitting on his own toolbox with his hands hanging down between his knees. He never built another one. Not one. In 7 years in a country full of people who needed them and would have paid. And once, when she was 15 and had got it into her head to dig a little cave in the creek bank for fun, he came down there and took the shovel out of her hands. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Not you, not ever. The ground does not forgive twice. So there she sat, 22 years old, November of 84. A mortgage in the cupboard frost coming up through her floorboards, a baby whose fingers went white indoors, looking at the one thing that could save them, which was the one thing her father had forbidden her to touch. She did not sleep that night. I know, because she told me years after, and because when I saw her at the store 2 days later, she had that gray look under the eyes that I have seen on 10,000 women and can read at 40 feet. She lay there and argued it out with a dead man. He was right. He was right, and she knew he was right. She had seen what one bad pipe does. But the boy died from bad air, and she knew exactly which mistake made it. Knowing the mistake is the whole difference. Her father knew that too, and he quit anyway, because he could not stand in a room with a thing that had killed a child, even if the thing was only a shape in the dirt. She could stand it. That was the truth she found in the dark, and it was not a comfortable one. She could stand it because she did not have the luxury of not standing it. Solveig was coughing on the other side of that curtain right now, 4 feet away. Marit could hear every one of them, and she had counted 22 since midnight. 22 coughs. He laid down that shovel because he lost one child, she thought. And I am going to pick it up because I have got 2. There is a thing that happens to a certain kind of woman at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Anybody who has been, one knows exactly what I mean. You have been lying there for hours with your mind going in a circle, and then somewhere in that black, cold hour, before it is honest to call it morning, the circle stops, and you get up. Marit got up at 4. She did not light the lamp. She knew that cabin in the dark the way you know your own mouth. She took the pry bar off the nail by the door and went to the northwest corner. She had picked it out days ago without admitting to herself she was picking anything. Behind the stove, under the bed where her sister and her son were sleeping. She knelt down on the boards and worked that bar in slow. Slow because nails scream if you pull them fast, and she did not want anybody waking up. She had no answer yet for what she was doing. Not one that would have sounded sane out loud. First board came up. Second, third. Underneath was the ground. Hard-packed dirt frozen a hand's depth down cold, coming off it in the dark. She set the bar aside and laid her bare hand flat on that frozen dirt, the way her father put her hand on a cut bank when she was 9 years old. And she smiled. She was not fighting it anymore. For 8 months she had been fighting the cold like it was a wolf at the door, and it was not a wolf. It was only a place where heat went out. Under that frost line, 3 feet down, 4 feet down, was the one thing in her entire life that had not changed since March. 50 degrees, give or take. Summer, winter, drought, blizzard. 50 degrees, the whole way down forever. She said it out loud in that dark cabin and was not entirely aware she was doing it. There you are. Now here is what the digging was actually like, and I am not going to make it pretty. 13 days that first stretch. Alone. The top 8 inches were frozen, and she had to break them with a mattock swinging in a space where she could not stand up on her knees, in the dark by one candle in a tin holder, while a 15-year-old girl and a baby slept 9 feet away. Under the frost, it went better. Clay and river gravel, and it came up sullen, but it came. She dug from 4 in the morning until first light. Then she put the boards back, put the rug over the boards, and went and lived her day. Because you still have to live the day. That is the part nobody tells you about hard times. The disaster does not excuse you from breakfast. So she fed them and washed and mended and hauled water and split wood. She could not afford to burn and made the mush. And sat Solveig down at the table for her sums, like a normal person, and answered when she was spoken to. Then she slept from 8 at night until 4. Then she got back down in the hole. Her hands went first. 4 blisters on the right palm by the 2nd day. On the 4th day they broke, and there was blood on the shovel handle, and she wrapped her hands in strips of flour sack and kept going. By the 2nd week, the blisters had gone to callus, thick and yellow and hard. She caught Solveig looking at those hands across the breakfast table one morning, not saying anything, just looking. Then there was the dirt. That was the part that took thinking. A hole 8 feet by 10 and better than 6 deep makes a mountain of dirt, and there is nowhere on this earth to put a mountain of dirt where nobody will see it. So she carried it out in a canvas sack. 2 buckets to a sack. 13 sacks a night out to the garden plot in the dark. And she spread it thin. That is the trick, and it was her father's trick, and it is on page 11 of the ledger. You do not pile it. You broadcast it an inch at a time over ground that is already dug ground. By spring, it is just garden. She spread better than 9 tons of Montana across her own vegetable patch that November. 1 sack at a time, 5 in the morning, in the dark, at 20 degrees. And there is not one soul on God's earth who would have believed her if she had told them. The valley noticed anyway. Valleys always do. Thad Kemp was first, and Thad Kemp would be. Carpenter. Good hands and a mouth that ran about 11 seconds ahead of his brain his entire life. He came by on a Tuesday to look at a wagon tongue she wanted mended, and he saw the fresh dirt out back and stood there in the yard with his thumbs in his belt. You digging out here, Ms. Ashby? Some root cellar. Something like that. He laughed. Not mean. That is the thing. He was not being mean, and I have always thought that made it worse. Late in the year for it. It is. That ground's fixing to freeze solid. I know. And you go digging under a house set on posts like that one, pointing with his chin real friendly. You'll have your floor sagging by March. Seen it happen. Fella over at Gannett Springs did the same fool thing and his whole east wall come out a plumb. Marit looked at him. Was his wall stone laid, or was it dirt? Thad blinked. How's that, his cellar wall? Was it faced with stone, or was it dirt with a prop in it? Dirt, I expect. I don't know. She said. That'd be why. And she went in the house. That is the whole of Marit Ashby in 11 words, and Thad Kemp did not know what to do with it. He told that story at the store for a week, and every man in there laughed, and not one of them heard what she actually said. Horace Wickstrom heard about it inside 2 days. Wickstrom was a careful man. I want to be fair to him, at least here at the start. He was no monster. He was a bookkeeper with a store attached, and he had a way of looking at you over the top of his spectacles like he was subtracting you from something. She went in on the 14th for lamp oil and candles. You cannot dig by feel. She bought $4 worth of candles. He made a note of it. Then he said conversational without looking up. Here you've got a project out at your place. Just improving the foundation. Foundation. That's right. He set down his pen. Mrs. Ashby, I don't know if you're aware, and I take no pleasure in raising it, but that property does secure a note. I'm aware. Something crossed his face. Just a flicker. He had not expected her to know, and she watched him decide not to ask how long she had known. Then you'll appreciate that alterations to a secured property are a matter of interest to the holder. It's under the floor, Mr. Wickstrom. Even so, there's not a thing changing that anybody can see from the road. That, he said and picked his pen back up, is generally what worries me. She paid. She carried her candles out, and she stood on the boardwalk in the cold for a second with her jaw set so hard it ached, because he had just told her something, and they both knew it, and neither one of them had said it out loud. He was going to be watching. I brought broth on the 19th, beef bones and barley. I make it in a pot the size of a wash tub, and I distribute it, and that valley learned a long time ago not to argue with me about it. I came up the path, and there was the garden. Dark, worked-over dirt. Fresh. In the 3rd week of November. I am an old woman who has been in and out of every house in that valley for 4 decades, and there is not much I do not know about how people live. I looked at that dirt, and I did the arithmetic in about the time it takes to say it. That is not garden dirt. That is subsoil. That is gravel and clay. That came from down. Then Marit came out on the step, with her hair tied back, and a smear of that same clay along her jaw that she did not know was there, and her hands wrapped in flour sacking. She looked at me. And I will tell you exactly what went across that girl's face, because I have seen it on 100 women in labor. Here it comes. Here comes the question. Here comes the opinion. Here comes somebody telling me why it will not work and why it is improper, and why a woman does not dig under her own house. So I handed her the crock. It's got marrow in it, I said. Make the girl drink the bottom part. She needs it. She stood there holding it. Cordy, cold out here, I said. Go on in. And I turned around and went home. I did not ask her one thing. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. People have asked me why. Whether I knew. I did not know. I want to be honest. I had no earthly idea what that girl was doing under her house. I only knew what she looked like standing on that step. She looked like somebody who had one thing left and was carrying it, and did not have a free hand for anybody's questions. I have been that woman twice, so I let her be. That is not wisdom. That is just remembering. Now, the last thing, and then I will let you go, and I am sorry, because this one stays with me. The 26th of November. Marit came in from the woodpile, and there was laundry, and she went through the pockets the way you do. In the pocket of Solveig's gray wool dress there was a letter, folded in 3, sealed with candle wax, addressed in that careful schoolgirl hand. To Mrs. Ingeborg Sanes, care of the Palace Hotel, Bozeman, Montana Territory. Their mother's cousin, a woman they had laid eyes on perhaps 4 times in their lives, who sent a card at Christmas and had once given Solveig a hair ribbon. Marit stood in the middle of that kitchen with the letter in her hand, and here is where it went sideways in her head. Follow it, because this is the whole heart of the thing. She's leaving me. That was the first thought. The second was, of course, she is. Who wouldn't? Who in this world would not leave? A cold house, and a dead man, and a sister who does not talk, and a baby crying at all hours, and cornmeal mush 4 nights running. I have failed her. Papa said, take care of your sister, and that was 3 years ago, and look at her. Look at her. She coughs all night, and her wrists are like kindling, and she is 15 years old, and she is writing to a woman she has met 4 times because she has worked out that anywhere is better than here. And Marit, who did not cry at her husband's grave, who did not cry when she found the mortgage, who had cried exactly once since March. And that was in a barn with her face in a horse. Marit broke the seal. She read it standing up, 4 sentences long. It said that Solveig Halvorsen was 15 years of age and could keep books and read a fair hand. It said she could work for board and did not require wages. It said she was strong and would not be sick often. The 4th sentence said, "My sister has a baby and a hard winter ahead of her, and one less mouth would go a long way, and I would be much obliged if you would answer quick before she has to ask." Marit read that 4 times. Before she has to ask, that child was not running. That child had sat down at that table in the cold with the good pen and a sheet of paper she must have been saving, and she had done the exact same arithmetic her sister was doing every night at 4 in the morning. 2 mouths, half a cord of wood, 5 months. And she had solved it the only way a 15-year-old can solve anything, by subtracting herself. Marit set the letter down on the table and put both hands flat on the wood on either side of it. She stood there in her own kitchen with the fire ticking down and the frost coming up through the floorboards and the wind starting again out in the draw, and the thought that came to her was so simple it nearly took her legs out. We have both been carrying it, the whole time, both of us, in the same 2 rooms, 9 feet apart. She thinks she is the weight, and I think I am, and neither one of us has said one word. Behind the curtain in the dark, Solveig coughed. Twice. Marit wiped her face with the back of a hand wrapped in flour sacking. Then she folded that letter along its 3 folds and put it back in the pocket of the gray wool dress exactly the way she found it. She was not going to shame that girl. Not ever. Not for that. Then she went and got the shovel, but she did not go down the hole. She stood at the foot of the bed where her sister was sleeping and waited until the room went gray, and when Solveig opened her eyes, Marit was standing over her holding 2 shovels. "Get up." "What?" "Get dressed. Wool stockings, both pair." "Marit, it's not even—" "I know what time it is." She held one of the shovels out. Solveig sat up in that bed with her hair every direction, and looked at her sister, and looked at the shovel, and looked at the 3 floorboards standing up out of the corner of the room like a door that had been there all along. "What is that?" "That's where you're going." "That's a hole." "It is. There is a hole in the floor of our house." "There is." Solveig's mouth opened, closed. "How long has there been a hole in the floor of our house?" 13 days. 13. "Dig with me," Marit said. The girl stared at her. "Dig with me. Then it's done, and then you'll see what it is. And after that, if you still want to go to Bozeman—" Solveig went white to the lips. "If you still want to go," Marit said, and her voice did not change at all, "I will put you on the coach myself, and I will not say one word against it." Nobody moved. Outside, the wind came down the draw and went under that house, the way it had every night since October, hauling the heat out from under them, patient as water. Solveig Halvorsen reached out and took the shovel. That was the last easy night any of us had. Because December was coming, and in December, that ground was going to teach both those girls something their father already knew, that it holds you, and that it does not forgive twice. The first morning, that girl lasted 7 minutes. 7. I have the number because Solveig counted it herself and told it on herself later, the way you do when a thing has stopped being humiliating and turned into a story. She went down that ladder at 4:30 with a shovel she could barely swing in a space where she could not stand, and she hit that frozen crust, and the shock went up the handle and through her wrists and into her teeth. And she said a word that a 15-year-old girl in 1884 was not supposed to know, let alone say, and certainly not in a hole under her own house at 4:30 in the morning. From the dark, 3 feet away, her sister said, "Say it again and mean it. Helps." That was the whole conversation. But something in that room changed, and it never changed back. Here is what those two did for the next 17 days, and I have heard people describe it since like it was some noble endeavor. It was not. It was filthy. They dug in the dark, 4 in the morning until the window went gray. Then the boards, back the rug over the boards, and out into the day like Christian women, and nobody in that valley knew a thing. Marit did the breaking. Matic work. She would not let the girl near it. Solveig did the hauling. 2 buckets to a sack up a ladder, made of scrap pine out the door across the yard, in the pitch dark spread thin over the garden. An inch at a time. Never a pile. 13 sacks a night became 18 with 2 of them working. And here is what surprised the both of them. Solveig was better at it. Not stronger. Lord, no. 90 pounds soaking wet, with a cough that rattled. But she was better because Solveig Halvorsen had a mind that liked a number, and by the 4th day she had that hole surveyed. She drove pegs. She ran a string line. She got the flour sack pencil and started keeping a page. Depth, length, buckets hauled. And at the bottom, in that careful hand temperature, at floor level temperature, at bottom of hole, taken twice daily. Marit came down one morning and found her sister sitting cross-legged in the dirt with a candle and that paper. "It's 51 down here." "What is it up top?" 22. The 2 of them looked at each other in the candlelight. 29 degrees, straight down, 4.5 feet. Solveig said quiet, "Papa knew that. Papa knew that." "Then why did nobody—" "Because they didn't ask him," Marit said. "Nobody ever asked him anything." And she picked up the mattock. "I need to tell you about Torvald Halvorsen now, because his daughters were digging his hole, and neither one of them could stop talking about him. Not out loud. They hardly said his name, but he came up out of that dirt with every shovelful. Solveig would find a way to wedge a stone, and Marit would say before she could stop herself, "No key'd turn it long way in," and then she would hear whose voice she was using and go quiet for 10 minutes. "I was a big man. Hands like fence posts." And a way of speaking English that made every sentence sound like he had thought about it a while first. Which he had. He was translating. He came over in 56 with a chest of tools and 11 words. And this valley, I am ashamed of this, and I was part of it. I will not pretend otherwise. This valley called him the Norwegian for 30 years, not unkindly. That was just his name. The Norwegian, like it was a job. He built half the chimneys standing in Little Bear Creek. He laid the foundation under the church. There are stone walls out on the Kittredge place standing today in 1906 that he set in 1863 without 1 ounce of mortar. I do not believe 6 people in that valley ever sat in his kitchen. Do you understand what I am telling you? That man knew how to keep a family alive underground in a hard winter. He knew it in his hands. He learned it from his own father in a country where the winter is a good deal worse than ours. For 30 years we had it. It was right here. It was walking up and down our road with a hod on its shoulder, and nobody asked. I have made my peace with a great many things at my age, not entirely with that one. The stone started the 2nd week of December. River rock. Round, gray, water smoothed. Marit had been gathering it all summer for a wall she never built, which is a piece of luck I have never been able to explain and have given up trying to. Now here is where the ground took its first bite. A dry stone wall. No mortar, nothing but rock on rock is held up by 2 things. Weight and angle. You do not stand it up straight. You lean it back into the earth. A hand's width of batter for every 3 feet of height, So the wall is always falling into the hill, and the hill is always pushing back, and the two of them argue forever, and neither one wins. That is page 14 of the ledger, in pencil, with a little drawing. Marit knew it. She had known it since she was 9 years old. And on the 9th of December, Marit Ashby stood that west wall up straight, because she was tired. A leaned wall eats more stone and takes longer to set, and she had 2 weeks of candles and a note coming due in April, and a sister who had already written to Bozeman. The plum wall went up so much faster, and it looked fine. That is the thing about the ground. It does not argue with you at the time. It waits. 4 days. It was the 13th of December, near 6 in the morning, and they were nearly done. That is the part I cannot get past. They were nearly done. Solveig had gone up the ladder with a sack. Marit was on her knees at the west wall, setting one last stone. There was a sound, not a crash. Everybody expects a crash. Solveig said it sounded like somebody sighing. A long, soft, tired sigh out of the wall. Then 8 feet of stacked river rock and 400 cubic feet of Montana clay came off that wall and took Marit Ashby down and buried her to the chest. Solveig was halfway across the yard. She heard it through the floor. And she told me, 30 years later, at my own table, and her hands were shaking when she said it. She told me the thing that came up out of that hole was not a scream. It was the candle going out. That is what she saw when she got to the opening. She had left a light burning down there 4 seconds ago, and now there was nothing. Black. 9 feet of black with her sister somewhere inside it. She went down that ladder without touching 4 of the rungs. 15 years old. 90 pounds. A cough that had been in her chest since October. In the dark. In a hole that had come down once and could come down again at any second. And she knew it. And she went in anyway. And she got her hands into the dirt and started to dig. She found her sister's hair first. Then her face. Marit's face was turned sideways in the clay, with about 4 inches of air in front of her mouth, and she was conscious, and she was breathing in short, shallow sips, because the weight of that dirt was on her ribs, and she had not taken a full breath in some seconds now. Marit, don't. I'm getting you, don't pull. You cannot pull them. That is the thing nobody knows until they are in it. You cannot pull a person out of a slide. You will take their shoulder off, and you will not move them 1 inch. You have to move the ground, all of it, by hand. So a 15-year-old girl knelt in the dark and moved the ground with her hands. 38 minutes. That is Solveig's number, and I believe it because she was a girl who counted things, and because she said the worst part was that she could hear her sister breathing, and the breathing kept getting shorter, and there was nothing in the world she could do to make her hands go faster. She dug with her fingers, broke 3 nails down into the quick, got a fist-sized rock loose, and it rolled onto her own knee, and she found that bruise a week later and did not remember getting it. She talked the entire time. That is the part I think about. She talked without stopping for 38 minutes and told me she had no idea what she said. Not 1 word of it, except that at some point she was reciting her multiplication tables. 7s, arms free at minute 24, ribs at 31. At 38 minutes, Marit Ashby came up out of that clay like something being born, and the two of them fell backward against the east wall together in the dark, and lay there. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Marit and I want you to hear this because it tells you everything about that girl. Marit lay there with her chest heaving and clay in her mouth, and said, I stood it up straight. What? The wall. I stood it up straight. Papa said, lean it back, and I stood it up straight because I was in a hurry. And she started laughing. That happens. Anybody who has been near real disaster knows. It is not funny, and you laugh anyway, and it sounds terrible, and it is the body throwing something off. She laughed until she cried. That was the second time Marit Ashby cried since March, and her little sister sat in the pitch dark, holding on to her arm with hands that were bleeding. Then Marit stopped, and said in a completely different voice, "Niels." The ceiling of that room was the floor of the cabin. The bed was on that floor. Neither one of them moved for about 2 seconds. Then both of them went up that ladder. He was fine. 14 pounds of baby sound asleep, 4 feet from where his mother nearly died, and he had not so much as rolled over. She picked him up anyway, filthy, bloody, shaking, and she picked that child up and held him and got clay all over his nightshirt, and Solveig stood in the doorway and watched. That was the morning it stopped being a project. They rebuilt. 9 more days, and it went slower, because Marit made it go slower, and she made herself sick doing it. Every stone she set from that day forward, she set leaning back. It took twice the rock. It took twice the time. She had 2 weeks of candles, and she burned 4. Solveig checked the angle. That was her job now. She gave it to herself, and she used a plumb bob made from a spool of thread and a musket ball. That one's proud. It's fine. It's proud by a ½ inch. Solveig, take it out. And Marit Ashby, who had never in her life taken an instruction from anybody, took the stone out. They packed pine bark and needles behind the stone. A foot of it tamped between the rock and the raw earth. They laid a floor of flat stone and covered it with cedar boughs and canvas. They built a sleeping platform out of boards from the old chicken house. On the 21st of December, they were done. Almost. Now I am going to tell you about the night of the 22nd, and I want you to steady yourself, because I have told this maybe 200 times in my life, and I have never once got through it easy. They tested it. That was the plan. One night down the 3 of them, before they moved everything, just to see. Marit ran the vent that afternoon. 4-inch stovepipe angled up through the foundation on the north side, coming out under the woodshed lean-to where it looked like nothing at all. 1 pipe. She looked at that pipe a long time before she set it. There was something at the back of her mind, something with a shape to it, a little cold spot behind her ribs that she could not name. And she was so tired. 30 days of digging and a wall coming down on her, and not 5 hours of sleep running since October. A note coming due. 3 days to Christmas. So she set the pipe, and she said out loud in the yard, "It's ventilated. There is a pipe. Air can get in," which is true, which is exactly precisely, word for word true, and which is not the question. They went down at 8 o'clock at night. Marit, Solveig, Niels, the oil lamp, and every quilt in the house. That room was warm. 54 degrees on the little thermometer she had hung from a nail, and up above the window glass was going white with frost. No wind. That is what got them both. 4 months living under a house where the wind ran all night like a river, and down there, nothing. Stone. Silence. Air that just sat. Solveig put her palm flat on the wall. "It's not cold." "No, Marit, it's not cold." She started to cry, which she had not done since March either, and Marit put an arm around her, and the 2 of them sat on that platform in the lamplight with a baby asleep between them. I did it, Marit thought. Pop, I did it, and I did it right. And I leaned the walls back, and it is 54 degrees, and my sister is warm. They put out the lamp at 9. They slept, and the air in that room began very quietly to change. Here is what 1 pipe does. Nothing. Air does not move because there is a hole. Air moves Because there is a difference in pressure, in temperature, high and low, and it needs a way in and a way out, and they cannot be the same way. One pipe is a door with no back door. 3 bodies in an 8 by 10 room breathing all night, and every breath puts out a little more of the bad and takes up a little more of the good. It does not smell. It does not sting. It does not wake you. That is the whole horror of it. It does not wake you. It makes you sleep better. Marit came up at 4 out of habit, and she was groggy in a way she did not care for, and her head hurt across the front, and she thought, I am tired, of course my head hurts. She lit the lamp, and the lamp did a thing. It came up small and yellow, and then it sat there, low, sullen, a little blue at the base, doing nothing, like a flame in a jar. Marit Ashby stared at that lamp, and the cold spot behind her ribs opened up like a trap door. She was 13 years old again. August of 1875. A woman screaming out past the Fossum place, and men running, and her father sitting on a toolbox in a dark shed with his hands hanging down between his knees. Anton Fossum was 7 and had a gap in his front teeth, and went down into a cool stone cellar on a hot afternoon and fell asleep. The vent was 1 pipe. She turned around. Solveig was breathing, slow, deep. Nils was on his back on the platform with 1 arm flung out. She picked him up, and he was limp. Not a sleep limp. There is a difference, and every mother on this earth knows it, and I do not have to explain it to one single woman listening to me. A sleep limp has weight in it. A sleep limp objects. This was rag. This was 14 months of boy hanging off her forearm like something set down. She did not scream. I have wondered about that my whole life. She told me she made no sound, and I believe her because there was not time and there was not air. She got him against her shoulder and went up that ladder, 1 hand, in the dark, with a 14-month-old child hanging off her, and she got the trapdoor with the top of her head and came out onto the floor of that cabin on her knees. Then out the door, into December. She went down in the snow in the yard, in her nightdress with no shoes, and laid that baby across her lap, in the open air, face up, and rubbed his chest with the flat of her hand, and said his name. Nothing. Said it again, nothing. Then the wind came down the draw. That wind. That same wind she had been fighting since October. The enemy. The thing that stole every ounce of heat out from under her family. And it went across that little boy's face. And he took a breath. A real one. Ragged. Then his arms came up, and his face screwed shut, and he screamed. He screamed like a scalded cat, loud enough to wake the Kittredges a 1/4 mile off, and his mother sat in a snowbank at 20 degrees in her bare feet and cried so hard she could not hold him steady. Solveig came out 4 minutes later, staggering, holding on to the doorframe. Marit, is he? I did it. He's crying. That's good. I did the exact thing, Marit said. The exact thing that killed that boy. She would not go back down. 3 days. She would not put a foot on that ladder. She sat up in that cold cabin in the chair by the stove with her son in her arms, and she did not sleep. And Solveig would come stand next to her and say something, and Marit would not answer. It was over. That is what she had decided, and I know it for a fact. And it is the only time in her life I ever heard that woman use the word quit. She was going to fill it in, shovel it back. 30 days of work, every ounce of it put back in the ground where it came from. Then take the note to Wickstrom and hand him the keys and put her sister on the coach to Bozeman. Because her father was right. Torvald Halvorsen laid down his tools in 1875 and never picked them up again, and he had been right the entire time, and she had been arrogant. That was the word she used on herself sitting in that chair for 3 days. The ground does not forgive twice. Well, it nearly hadn't. Christmas Eve morning, I came by with a pie. I want to be clear that I still did not know one thing. She had a hole under her house, and I had let her be, and I had gone on letting her be for 6 weeks. But she looked bad. She came to the door looking like a woman who had been awake for 70 hours, which she had. So I did what I do. I came in and put the pie down and put the kettle on in another woman's kitchen without asking, and I sat down and started talking about nothing. That is the trick, if you want to know it. You do not ask them. You talk about nothing, and you sit there, and eventually they will tell you or they will not. And either way, you have been there. So I talked. I talked about the Teague baby come in November, which had been a hard one. 11 hours and the room hot as an oven, and Alma's mother had the windows sealed up with rags on account of the draft. And I said, God as my witness, I was complaining. That is all I was doing. I was an old woman grousing about a stuffy room. I said, I finally got up and pulled the rag out of the low window and cracked the top sash. Because a room with the fire going and 4 women in it, you cannot just open one thing. Air's got to have a door in and a door out. Otherwise, it just sits there and everybody gets a headache and the mother can't push. And I reached for my tea. Marit Ashby stood up so fast her chair went over backward. I about had a stroke. Marit, say that again. Say what again? About the window. I said you can't open just one. A door in and a door out. Well, yes, honey, everybody knows. She was already gone. She went past me. She got the ledger out of her father's trunk and got down on the kitchen floor with it on her knees, going through it page by page with her thumb. And I sat there with my tea in my hand, watching a widow crawl around on her own floor. And I thought, well, Cordy, you have finally seen it. That is grief and hunger, and it has gone and taken her mind. I did not know what I had just said. I did not know for 6 weeks. I have thought about it every day since. Not with pride. That is what people get wrong when they tell it back to me. There was no wisdom in it. I was a tired old woman complaining about a lying-in room, but I had been in 400 of those rooms. That is not nothing. That is 40 years of watching what happens to air when you put people in a box, and I did not know I knew it until it came out of my mouth in somebody else's kitchen on Christmas Eve. She found the tear. Page 19. That 1/4-inch stub with the tails of a few pencil strokes on it. She sat back on her heels, because she finally understood what had been on it. Her father had not cut that page out because it was wrong. He cut it out because it was right. He had figured it out. After they carried Anton Fossum up out of that cellar sometime in that long black year. Solveig Halvorsen had sat down and worked out exactly what went wrong and drawn the fix. 2 pipes, one low, one high, a difference in height, cold air falling in at the bottom, warm air rising out at the top. A slow, steady turn of the whole room all night for nothing, for free, because that is what air does when you give it somewhere to go. Then he looked at that drawing and understood that it would have taken about 90 minutes and 40 cents to have done it that way in the first place. And he cut the page out with a knife, and he never built another one. Marit knelt on that floor a long time. What she said to me later was, he wasn't warning me off it, Cordy. He was ashamed. He never got to fix it, and I got to fix it. She did it on Christmas Day. Second pipe. 2-inch salvaged up through the northwest corner at the ceiling of the room and out along the joist bay to the east side. High. And the first pipe she cut down and brought in low, 6 inches off the stone floor. A 4-foot difference in height between them. That is all. That is the entire thing. On the night of the 26th, she went down there alone with a candle and shut the trap door and sat on the platform with the candle at chest height. and watched it for 4 hours. It stood up straight and yellow, and it burned all night. She came up at 4 in the morning with the candle still going, and she was so tired she had to sit down on the floor. Now I have to tell you about the other thing that was happening that December. While those two girls were under the ground fighting for their lives, a man in a store 2 miles away was doing arithmetic of his own. Horace Wickstrom moved on the 29th. Registered letter, which in that valley meant something, and everybody at the post counter saw it come in, and I do not believe that was an accident. It said the holder had cause to believe the secured property had been materially altered. It said excavation beneath a post and pier foundation constituted waste, which is a legal word, and it means damage to a property somebody else has an interest in. It said that per Clause 9, the holder was calling the note, payable the 15th of January, 1885, not April, January. $240 in 17 days. Marit read it standing at the counter. She did not sit down, and she did not change her face, and there were 4 people in that store, and every one of them watching. She folded it and put it in her apron, and she said one thing quiet, and Harlan the clerk heard it and repeated it for the next 40 years. "Who told you?" Wickstrom did not look up from his ledger. "I don't take your meaning. There's no road past my place. There's nothing behind me but the creek. Somebody had to walk up there and look, and then come tell you." "Mrs. Ashby, who told you?" He turned a page. "You'll want to be thinking about the 15th. She found out anyway. Of course she did. It is a valley, and a valley has about 4 secrets in it at any one time, and none of them lasts a month. It was Thad Kemp. And I want to tell you how she found out, because it is the saddest part of this whole business, and nobody ever remembers it right. She did not find out from gossip. She found out because she went by the store on the 2nd of January, and there was new shelving going up behind the dry goods counter. Good work. Dovetailed. Thad Kemp's hand, and anybody in that valley could have told you so from 30 feet. Thad was up on a stool fitting the top rail. He saw her, and he came down off that stool so fast he knocked it over. "Ms. Ashby, that's nice work. Ms. Ashby, listen. How much is he paying you for it?" Thad Kemp stood in front of a woman he had known since she was 20 and could not get a word out. $18, he said finally. $18. He asked me. He asked what I'd seen out your way, and I said you was digging, and I said the floor'd sag, and I said it because I believed it. I still believe it. I wasn't Thad. I got 4 kids and no work till the thaw, and maybe 6 weeks of wood. Thad? He stopped. Marit Ashby looked at that man a long moment, and she said, "I know. That was all. I know." And she walked out. Thad Kemp sat down on the floor of the general store in front of 11 feet of beautiful new shelving and put his hands over his face, and Harlan had to come around the counter and get him. He was not a villain. That is the thing. That is the whole of how a valley freezes to death, and it is not the cold that does it. It is 4 kids and 6 weeks of wood and $18. A man tells a small true thing to the wrong person, and it costs a widow her house. He did not sleep right for 2 years, which is a punishment nobody assigned him, and which he served anyway, and I want that on the record. They moved down on the 18th of January. No, the 8th. Forgive me, I am 86 years old, and I have told this too many times. The 8th of January, 1885, and I have the date because it was my birthday. And I turned 65, and nobody made a fuss on account of it being 10 below. They took everything: bedding, the lamp, Solveig's books, a crock of dried apples, cornbread salt pork, the thermometer, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth on a shelf Marit had built into the stone. Marit went down the ladder last with Nils. She stood on that stone floor and reached up and pulled the trapdoor closed over her head. and the wind stopped. Just stopped. Mid-word. The way a sound stops when a train goes into a tunnel, and you never knew how loud it had been until it is not there anymore. They had lived inside that noise for 4 months. Solveig sat down on the platform and started to laugh, and could not stop, and it turned into coughing, and it turned back into laughing. 54 degrees, up above on the porch thermometer 9, and down at the low pipe, if you held a candle in front of it, the flame leaned, just a little, just enough to see. Air coming in cold and slow, sliding along the stone floor, warming, rising, going out the high pipe under the eave. All night, every night, for free. Solveig wrote it in her book. Jan, 8, 54 below 9 above. Flame leans, nobody's head hurts. They ate supper down there, cornbread and apples. And Nils Ashby, 14 months old, got up on his feet and walked 4 steps across a stone floor. His mother had dug out of the ground with her own 2 hands and fell down and thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anybody. Marit put her palm flat on that wall, the way her father put her hand on a cut bank when she was 9 years old. And it was not cold. 7 days later, Horace Wickstrom's note came due. And 3 days before that, on the 11th of January, 1885, it started to snow. It started on a Sunday, the 11th of January, and it came in so gentle that half that valley stood out on their porches and admired it. Big soft flakes, the kind that come down sideways and land on your sleeve hole, so you can see the shape of them before they go. Alma Teague said it looked like the inside of a music box. I remember that. I remember standing in my own doorway at 4 in the afternoon with a dish towel over my shoulder, watching it come down over the creek, thinking we would have a pretty week of it. 40 winters, and I stood there like a tourist. By dark, the wind had got up. By midnight, it was not snow anymore. It was something else. Something with weight to it coming down the draw, out of the northwest, in one long, unbroken roar. And when I got up to see to the fire, the window on that side was solid white and packing tighter while I watched. Monday morning, my porch thermometer read 1 below. Monday night, 19 below. Tuesday, it stopped being weather. Let me explain something about a real blizzard, because I have heard people use that word about a snowstorm in Chicago, and it makes me want to sit down. A blizzard is not cold, and it is not snow. It is wind, with snow in it moving so hard and so long that the air itself turns solid white and stays that way for days. You cannot see your own hand. Not your own hand held out at arm's length in the middle of the afternoon. Men have died 40 feet from their own door because they went out for an armload of wood and turned around and could not find the house. That is not a story. That happened at Gannett Springs in '81 to a man named Pruitt, and his family found him in April. So on Tuesday, the 13th of January, that whole valley went down like a hand closing. And every one of us was on our own. Here is what the cold does to a cabin. And I want the women listening to me to picture their own kitchen while I say it. First, the wood goes, not because you burn through it, because it is out there under 4 feet of drift, welded in with ice. And you go out with a shovel and dig for 20 minutes and get 11 sticks. And half of them are wet through. Wet wood does not burn. Wet wood smokes. Then the chimney goes. A smoky fire makes a cold flue, and a cold flue in a 40-mile wind does not draw. It backs up. You sit there with your eyes streaming and your fire dying and the smoke coming out into the room. Then, the water. My bucket froze inside of an hour on Tuesday, sitting 4 feet from a lit stove. Then you start burning things you cannot replace. Ruth Pell burned 2 chairs. The Kittredges burned their fence rails, 90 feet of them, and I do not blame them one particle. A man over at the far end burned his wife's loom and cried while he did it, and she helped him. That is where all of us were by Tuesday night, down at the Ashby place. The fire was out by 9 o'clock. Not out. Banked. There is a difference, and Marit knew it. She had been reading that stove for 4 months the way a woman reads a face, and she looked at what she had, and did the arithmetic she had been doing since October. 11 sticks of dry, maybe 30 pounds of wet, and the wind coming under that floor like a river under a bridge. The thermometer on the wall said 38 degrees. Inside, with the fire going, Solveig said, "It's not holding." "No, Marit, it's not. I know." She looked at that stove for maybe 4 seconds, because there is a thing that has to happen in a woman's head at a moment like that, and it is not courage, whatever anybody tells you. It is subtraction. It is looking at what you have got and what you have not got, and letting go of the second one all at once. She banked the fire low, just enough to keep a little warmth in the flue so it would not crack. She wrapped Nils in 2 quilts and got him against her shoulder. She handed her sister the lamp. Down. What about the down, Solveig? They went. Marit came last and pulled that trapdoor shut over her head. And the wind stopped. The whole valley was screaming, and it stopped. Like somebody closed a book. 52 degrees on the nail. Stone dry to the touch. Air sitting still and clean and down at the low pipe. The candle flame leaned in just barely, the way it had leaned every night since Christmas. Solveig sat down on the platform, and she said in a very small voice, "We're all right." And Marit Ashby, standing on a stone floor she had dug out of the ground with her own 2 hands, said nothing at all. She was thinking about everybody else. Wednesday morning, she went up. She did that twice a day the whole storm, and I want you to understand what it cost her. You do not just open a trap door. You come up into a room at 10 degrees, and the cold hits you like a slap, and takes the breath out of your chest so fast it hurts. She went up to feed that flue. 2 sticks. Keep it warm enough not to crack. Keep a thread of smoke going up so the pipe stayed open. Then she went to the east window and scraped a place with her thumbnail. That is where it all changed. Wednesday, there had been smoke on the ridge. 3 or 4 gray threads standing up out of all that white bent flat by the wind. But there. Thursday morning, the 15th of January. Nothing. She scraped bigger place. Nothing. She got up on a chair and scraped the top of the sash and put her eye to the glass. My chimney was cold. Let me sit with that a minute. I was a half-mile from that girl. 65 years old, living alone out of dry wood since Tuesday afternoon. I burned my kitchen table Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, I was in my bed under everything I owned with my boots on, and I had stopped being frightened. You stop being frightened. It gets quiet, and it gets sort of warm, and you get very interested in going to sleep. I have thought since that if that girl had been 11 minutes later, I would have gone, and I would have gone content. And that is the most terrifying thing I know about this world. Marit stood on that chair with her eye to the glass. Then she turned and looked north. The Kemp place was up that way. The Kemps had 4 children under 9, and Thad Kemp had told Horace Wickstrom about a hole under a widow's floor for $18. No smoke there either. She got down off the chair. Here is where her mind went, and she gave it to me straight years later, and I am giving it to you the same way. I have got 8 feet by 10. I have got maybe 10 hours of dry wood and half a crock of apples. If I bring 6 people down there, we will burn through what air those pipes can turn over. and we will all go to sleep, and not one of us will wake up. That is exactly how Anton Fossum died. And then the ugly one, the one she was ashamed of until the day she died. He told Wickstrom, that is what came up in her standing in that freezing kitchen on the 15th of January. He told Wickstrom, and I have got 17 days to find $240, except I do not, because the note came due today. Today, the 15th. In the middle of a white world where there was not a road or a lawyer or a courthouse anywhere on God's earth. Horace Wickstrom's paper had come due at midnight, and she had not paid it. And by every rule of every law book in the territory, that cabin was not hers anymore. She was standing in a house that had stopped belonging to her about 9 hours ago, and she was about to go out in a 50-mile wind at 24 below to save the man who did it. She put her hands on the edge of the table, and she said out loud to nobody in an empty kitchen, "Papa, I don't want to." Then she got her coat. She woke Solveig. "Listen to me. What's Cordy's chimney's out? Kemps's too." Solveig sat straight up. "You can't. Listen. You cannot go out in that you can't even see the Solveig Halvorsen. Listen to me." The girl shut her mouth. "Rope from the shed to the porch post. I'll run it. When I'm out, you keep this door shut, and you keep that candle lit, and you watch it. If it goes small and blue, you open the top damper all the way, and you get your face down by the low one. Do you hear me? Yes. Say it back. Small and blue, open the top face at the bottom. Niels doesn't come up. Not for anything. Not if the house burns down on top of you." Solveig's face did something then. "Marit." "What?" "Come back." And Marit Ashby said, "That's the plan," which is not the same as yes, and they both knew it. She went out on a rope. There was a coil of hemp line in the shed, 60 feet of it, and she tied one end to the porch post and paid it out with her left hand as she went, because a rope is the only honest thing in a whiteout. 60 feet gets you to the shed. It does not get you a half-mile. So she did the thing her father taught her, which is that in country like this, you do not navigate by seeing. You navigate by feeling. The creek runs a certain direction. The wind runs a certain direction. Put the wind on the same cheek and keep it there and count. She counted her steps. 1,100 and some to my door, she reckoned. She was wrong. It was closer to 1,400, and those last 300 steps. She did not know whether she was walking to my house or walking out onto the flats to die. She got there. She got there because she hit my rail fence with her hip and followed it in. She came through my door in a wall of white and got it shut with her shoulder and came into my bedroom, and I will tell you what I remember. I remember being annoyed. That is the truth. I was so far gone, I was cross with her for waking me up. I said something. I do not know what. She pulled the covers off me and got me sitting and started putting my second coat on me like I was 4 years old, and I said, "Cordelia Mabry does not need," and she said, "Then walk." 2 words. Then walk. I have loved that girl for 21 years for those 2 words, because she did not coddle me, and she did not carry me. She made me get up on my own legs at 65 years old and go. That was the first trip. She made 3. She took me back on the rope line and got me down that ladder, and I remember the warmth coming up out of that hole, like the breath of something living. I remember Solveig's face in the lamplight. I remember sitting down on a stone floor under a house and starting to shake so hard I could not hold a cup. That is what happens when you come back. You do not shake while you are dying. You shake after. Then she went out again. For the Kemps. Half a mile the other direction with the wind on the wrong cheek. Now, which means she had it in her face going and had to trust the Count coming back. She found that house because Ada Kemp had hung a red wool blanket over the window on Tuesday, and there was one hand's width of it showing through the drift. Thad Kemp opened that door and found Marit Ashby standing in it. That man went down on his knees in his own doorway, in front of his wife and his 4 children. He went straight down like his legs had been cut, and he started saying something, and she reached down and got him by the collar of his coat. "Not now. Miss Ashby, not now. Get the children." 6 of them on that rope, Ada carrying the baby Thad, with the 2 little ones, the oldest boy walking on his own with his hand in his father's belt. Marit went last, counting. Third trip was Silas Renner, 81 years old, living alone at the end of the valley in a soddy the size of a chicken coop. And everybody in that valley had spent 30 years laughing at Silas Renner because he said every single autumn that we were in for it. He was in for it all right. He had a fire the size of a teacup, and he had been eating dry oats for 2 days. And when she came through his door, he looked up and said, "Told you." And Marit Ashby laughed out loud in a soddy at 24 below. "You did. Nobody listens. Get your boots, Mr. Renner. 11 of us. In a room 8 feet by 10 with a ceiling you could touch sitting up. Let me tell you what that is like because I lived it, and I have never once been able to make anybody understand who was not down there. There is no floor space. None. You sit with your back against stone and your knees up, and somebody's child is asleep across your feet, and the woman beside you is close enough that you can feel her breathing, and you can feel it for 4 days. It is dark. 1 lamp, and we lit that twice a day, because a lamp eats air the same as a person does. It smelled like people. I will not pretend otherwise. 11 unwashed bodies and a baby, and wet wool and pine bark packed behind the walls. By the 3rd day it smelled like a barn. By the 4th day, nobody noticed. And it was 51 degrees, which is cold in a house, which is life in a blizzard. Marit ran that room. I want that said plain, because there are versions of this going around now where she is some poor frightened thing who got lucky, and that is not what I saw. She ran it like a ship's captain. She put Solveig on the candle. That was the whole science of it, and it was not a small thing. A candle at chest height in the middle of the room checked every hour, and the rules were on a page in Solveig's book, and she read them out loud twice a day like scripture. Tall and yellow fine. Gone small, open the top damper. Small and blue, everybody down on the floor, face at the low pipe, and open the trap door for a count of 60. We did that 4 times over 4 days. She rationed the wood, not for the house. There was no house anymore, not really. 2 sticks in that stove twice a day to keep the flue from cracking and keep 1 thread of smoke going up out of that chimney where anybody could see it. Because if it went out, she said, somebody might come looking, and nobody was going to die on the way to look for us. She rationed the food. 11 people, 1 crock of dried apples, 4 pounds of cornbread, salt pork, and about 9 pounds of hard beans that Ada Kemp had the presence of mind to grab off her own shelf. She fed the children first and the old people second. She ate last. Twice I watched that girl eat nothing at all and tell Ada Kemp she had already had hers, and she put people to work. That is the part I have thought about most in 21 years, and it is the part I would want any woman listening to me to take home tonight. There was not any work. You understand? There was nothing to do. 11 people in a hole in the ground with 4 days to wait, and she gave every single one of us a job anyway. She put me on the children, told me I had more experience of small people than the rest of them put together, which was true, and which she knew perfectly well would keep me from lying there thinking about my cold house and my dead husband and how close I had come. I told stories for 4 days. I sang every hymn I know, and about 9 I made up. She put Thad Kemp on the ladder, and the trap door. Any time it needed opening, he did it. A carpenter with nothing to build, and she gave him a door. She put Ada on the food. She put the Kemp boy, 9 years old, in charge of counting hours with a string and a knot for every candle check. And that child took his responsibilities so seriously he would not sleep through one. And Silas Renner. She sat down next to him on the second day and said, "Mr. Renner, you've seen more of these than anybody down here. When's it going to break?" Now. He did not know. He could not possibly have known. But that old man sat up against the wall and thought about it and gave his opinion like a judge. And he was consulted twice a day for 4 days. And when he died, 3 winters later, they found he had told half the county about it. Nobody heals from being comforted. I want to say that, as clearly as I know how, because I have been an old woman a long time, and I have watched a great many people get comforted right into the grave. People heal from being needed. That girl knew it at 22, and I do not know how. Saturday night was the 17th. There had come a lull that afternoon, 3 hours maybe. The wind dropped off, and the light came up gray instead of white, and you could see the ridgeline. It fooled a lot of people that day. It fooled people all up and down that part of the territory. And somewhere in that lull, Horace Wickstrom hitched a team. He had business. A note had come due at midnight on the 15th of January and had not been paid, and to perfect a default, a man has to file, and to file a man has to get to the county seat. He was driving to Miles City in January to put a widow's cabin on the courthouse books. 2 miles out of town, the wind came back like a door slamming. It took his wagon off the road at the creek bend and rolled it over. He cut a horse loose and lost it inside of a minute. So Horace Wickstrom, 54 years old, in a good wool coat and city gloves, started walking in the only direction he could remember, which was down the creek. He hit the Ashby fence about 8 o'clock at night. There was smoke out of that chimney, one thread of it, because a woman had been going up twice a day for 4 days to feed a fire in an empty house. He got to the porch and got inside, and it was 10 degrees in there and dark, and there was nobody in it. Nobody. I have wondered ever since what that was like. Standing in an empty, freezing house you had legally owned for 2 days, with your team gone and your feet already numb and not one soul in it. Then he heard something. Under the floor. A child laughing. He got down on that floor and pulled the rug back and found a trap door and beat on it with the flat of his hand. Down below. We all heard it. Everything stopped. 10 people went dead silent in a hole in the ground, and Ada Kemp put her hand over her baby's mouth like it was Indians. Thad Kemp was up the ladder in 1 second with his ear to the boards. Somebody's up there. Who is it? That was Ada. Bang, bang, bang. Then a voice muffled through 2 inches of pine. Hello, hello, is somebody down there? Silas Renner said, That's Wickstrom. Nobody moved. I am not going to pretty this up for you. Nobody moved. I include myself. I have made my peace with the Lord about a good many things, and I have not entirely made peace with that. We all knew. The whole valley knew by then. About the registered letter and the 15th of January and the $18 of shelving. Ada Kemp said low, he'd have put her on the road. And somebody else said, and I will go to my grave not saying who, because she is dead and her grandchildren are good people. Somebody said, there's no room, which was true. That is the thing. It was true. There was not 1 square foot of that floor uncovered, and the candle had gone small twice that day already. And every body you put in there is 1 more mouth taking out of the air. It was a true thing to say. It was the truest, most reasonable, most decent-sounding thing anybody said in that whole storm. Marit Ashby stood up. She had to stoop. There was no headroom to stand. She went to the ladder, and Thad Kemp came down out of her way without being told. And she stopped with her hand on the rung and looked back at us. I will tell you what was on that girl's face, because I have thought about it for 21 years and never once been able to describe it right. It was not saintliness. There was nothing soft in it. She looked tired. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic she had already done and did not care for the answer to. Then she went up 2 rungs and put her shoulder into that trapdoor and shoved it open. And the cold came down on all of us like water. Horace Wickstrom was on his hands and knees on the floor above snow blowing in past him. Hat gone, face the color of a fish. He looked down into a lamp-lit hole in the ground full of people. Marit Ashby looked up at him. And she said it in front of every soul in that room. And there is not one of us ever told it a different way, and I have heard it told at 3 funerals. Mr. Wickstrom, that paper of yours came due on Thursday. I know it. You know it. Come spring, you'll take this house, and I'll not fight you for it, because you'll be within your rights. He did not say anything. I do not think he could. But I can't lay down here tonight and sleep on top of a man freezing to death over my head. I'd not sleep again. Then she moved over on the ladder. Come down. Mind the 4th rung, it's split. Mind the 4th rung, it's split. That is what she said to the man who had taken her house. We made room. We made room because Marit told us to, and because when the person who dug the hole tells you to move, you move. Silas Renner shifted 11 inches. I took a child onto my lap that had been on the floor. Ada Kemp pulled her knees up, and Horace Wickstrom came down a ladder into a widow's hollow and sat on a stone floor with his back against a wall her father had taught her how to lay. He did not speak for about an hour. Then he said to nobody, "My team's at the creek bend." Thad Kemp said, "They'll be dead by now." And Wickstrom said, "Yes." That was all the conversation that man made in 2 days. He sat there. He drank the water they gave him and ate the beans they gave him and watched that candle and watched Marit Ashby run that room. And I saw his face when she came down on Sunday from feeding the stove frost on her eyelashes and gave the last of her own supper to his carpenter's child. I saw his face. That is all I will say about it. It broke on the 19th, Monday morning, and I have never in my life heard a silence like that silence. After 4 days of a roar, you have stopped hearing. Its stopping is a physical event. It wakes you. It woke every one of us at about the same minute, and we all lay there in the dark, trying to work out what was wrong. Thad Kemp went up first and got the trapdoor open. And the light that came down that hole after 4 days of one candle was so bright, I had to put my hands over my face. We came up out of the ground into a world that was not the world. Everything white and round. No fences, no shapes. The woodshed was a hill. Snow up over the eaves on the north side of that cabin drifted clean to the roofline, and the sun on it so hard you could not look for more than a second without your eyes running. And it was silent. Not a bird, not a branch. 11 of us stood in that yard in the sun, and none of us said one word for a long while. Then Ada Kemp started crying and set the rest of us off, and the children thought we had all gone mad. We dug out over the next 3 days, and here is where the valley learned something, and it was not in a lecture, and it was not in a church. It was in a woodshed. Thad Kemp got Marit's shed open on Tuesday and stood there. There was wood in it. Not much. But there was wood in it in the 3rd week of January after 9 days of blizzard, when every other family in Little Bear Creek had burned their furniture and their fence rails, and in one case, a loom. He came around the corner into the yard with a look on his face. "How much did you burn?" "In the storm, in the storm." She thought about it. 2 sticks twice a day, 6 days below and 3 before that. Thad Kemp did that sum in his head. So did I. So did everybody standing there. Less than a third of a cord. I had burned better than 2 cords since the 1st of January, and I had come within an hour or so of dying in my own bed. The Kittredges figured near 3, and down at the far end a man whose name I will not use had burned 2 cords, and his wife's loom, and his youngest still lost 2 toes. Less than a third of a cord. 3 people for 9 days, 11 people for the last 4, and not one of them so much as sniffling. That is the number that changed that valley. Not the story, not the courage, not any of the things people put in songs. The wood count. You can argue with a story. You cannot argue with a woodshed. There was talk that week about the valley over the divide. I am not going to give you a number, because I do not have one, and I have got no patience with people who repeat things they cannot stand behind. What I will tell you is what came down the road with the mail in February. They had it worse over there. Some people did not come through it. A family got separated between the house and the barn. That is what we heard. I never saw a list. I never met anybody who did. But I will tell you this, and I will stand on it in Little Bear Creek. In the storm of January 1885, we did not bury one soul. Not one. And every single one of us knew exactly why. You would think that would be the end of it. You would think a man comes up out of a hole where a woman saved his life, and there is a change of heart and a torn-up paper and everybody weeping. That is not what happened. Horace Wickstrom walked back to town on the 21st of January, and on the 4th of February he filed. Sit with that. He filed on that cabin. Default on the 15th notice recorded the 4th sale to follow in the spring. He came out to tell her himself, which some people said afterward was decency, and I have always thought was something else. He stood in her yard, with his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Ashby, I owe you my life, and I will say so to any man who asks me." "All right, and a debt is a debt." She looked at him. "Say that again." "A debt is a debt," he said. "I did not make the note. Your husband made the note. And if I let this one go, I will have to let the next one go. And there are 17 households in this valley on my books, and I will be out of business by June. And then, where is anybody?" And do you know what? He was not entirely wrong. That is the thing that makes me tired to this day. He was not entirely wrong. And men who are not entirely wrong have done more harm in this world than men who are. Marit Ashby said 17. "What? You said 17 households." He put his hat back on. "Good day, Mrs. Ashby." The digging started the 2nd week of February. Not because anybody preached at them, because of a woodshed. Kittredge went first, then the Pells, then a family named Ostrand out past the school. By the end of the month, there were 4, and by the next winter, there were 7. Marit showed anybody who asked. Every one of them. She would put her coat on and walk out to their place in the mud and stand in the hole with them and tell them the same 4 things. 5 feet down the ground quits changing. Lean your walls back into the earth. Never straight up. 2 pipes. 1 low, 1 high. Never 1. And the wind is what takes it, not the cold. Get under the wind. Stay below the wind. That was the phrase. That is what she said, and it is what everybody in that valley said for 50 years afterward. And there are people saying it today who have not the first idea where it came from. Now I have to tell you about Solveig's book. That girl kept a book on everything. You have heard that already. Depth of a hole, temperature at the floor, buckets hauled, candle checks. And for 2 years, every single time, she sat on that bench in Wickstrom's store, waiting on her sister. And in a valley like that, you wait. You wait 40 minutes for a man to weigh out 4 pounds of nails while he talks about the weather. She copied, not to catch anybody. Let me be plain, because people have made her into some kind of child detective, and she was nothing of the sort. She copied because she was a 15-year-old girl with a pencil and nothing to do, and a mind that liked a column of figures. And Horace Wickstrom kept his ledger open on the counter facing out where anybody could see it because he was proud of his hand. She copied out of boredom. She had 14 pages of it. And on the 6th of February, sitting on the platform in that hollow with a candle, she said, "Marit, what did you pay him in November of '83? Why, just tell me." $9. Everett went in with the hay money. And December, 9. And in March, after, 6. It was all I had. Solveig turned the page around, and Marit Ashby looked at 14 pages of a store ledger copied out in a schoolgirl's hand, and found it in about 90 seconds. Here is the thing. Solveig had the figures. She had every figure. But she was 15 years old, and had never in her life paid a debt. And a column of numbers is just a column of numbers unless you know what is supposed to be in it. Marit knew. Marit had paid every one of those dollars out of a tin box on a shelf. She knew what she had handed across that counter, and on what day. She could feel the shape of that money the way you feel the shape of your own kitchen in the dark. The payments were there. Credited. Every one. Right down the column. And the interest was still being figured on the whole 240. Every month. On the original sum. As if not $1 had ever come in. 15 months of it. She went through all 14 pages on her knees on that stone floor with the candle guttering. 17 households. 12 of them where the name at the top of the column was a woman's name. Widows, every one. Because a widow has no husband to walk in and say, "Now hold on there, Horace." And because a widow has been raised her whole life to believe that a man with a ledger and a pair of spectacles knows more about her money than she does. Marit sat back. Solveig said, "Is it bad?" And her sister said, "It's the same mistake 17 times. That's not a mistake then." No. So what do we do? Here is where I lose people. Everybody who hears this wants the same ending, and it is not the ending she gave them. She could have gone to law. There was a sheriff. There was a circuit judge who came through twice a year. She had 14 pages in a child's handwriting and a grievance you could see from space. And it would have taken 2 years and cost money she did not have. The first thing any lawyer in this territory would have said is a 15-year-old girl copied these off a counter, and who is to say she copied them right? And who is to say she did not copy them wrong on purpose, seeing as how her sister was in default? She would have lost. And even if she had won, she would have won for herself. 1 column out of 17. She sat on that floor a long time. Then she got up and put on her coat and walked 2 miles to the parsonage and put those 14 pages in front of Pastor Sowell. And she said one sentence. "I want the 15th of February before the sermon, and I want you to read the announcement of it out on the 8th, so everybody comes." He looked at those pages about 10 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "Mrs. Ashby, do you want me to read this?" "No, sir." "It'd carry more weight from—" "No, sir, it's my sister's hand. I'll read it." Everybody came. Everybody. I have never seen that church so full. Not at Christmas. Not at a funeral. People stood along the back wall in their coats. Somebody's team was tied up all the way down past the smithy. Horace Wickstrom was in the 4th pew on the left, where he had sat for 16 years. and Marit Ashby came up to the front in a black wool dress that had belonged to her mother and put 14 pages on the rail. She did not have a speech. She had numbers, and she read them. Mrs. Alma Teague, note of $60, October of 1883. Paid $4 in December. Paid for in March. Paid for in June. Interest for the following month figured on $60. Pause. Mrs. Ruth Pell, note of $110. Paid $11 in January of 84. Interest for February figured on $110. Pause. Mrs. Delphine Kittredge. She went through all 17. It took 17 minutes, and I know because Solveig timed it and wrote it down. Of course she did. And there was not one adjective in the whole of it. Not one. No cheat. No thief. No shame on you. Not a single word of the kind that lets a room feel good about itself and lets the man in the fourth pew tell himself he is being persecuted. Just names and dates and dollars and the same sentence over and over. Interest figured on the original sum. By the 7th name, people had started to understand. By the 12th, Alma Teague was crying. By the 15th, there was a sound in that church I have never heard in a church before or since. Not shouting, not weeping, just this low sound of 40 people breathing wrong. When she got to the end, she said, "That's all of them. The figures are here on the rail. Anybody who wants to check them against their own book is welcome. And I'd be obliged if you would, because I could have got something wrong." Then she picked up her hat and walked down the aisle and sat down in the back next to me. And the whole church turned around and looked at Horace Wickstrom. That is all. Nobody stood up. Nobody laid a hand on him. There was not one raised voice in that building. 40 people just turned around in the pews and looked at him. He sat there maybe 40 seconds. Then he got up and walked out, and his boots on the floorboards were the loudest thing in the territory. Thad Kemp stood up in that same church 3 Sundays later. Nobody asked him to. Pastor Sowell had finished and was fixing to give the benediction, and Thad Kemp stood up in the middle of the 5th pew with his hat in both hands. I got to say something, and he could not get it out. He stood there the better part of a minute, with his jaw working and his wife holding on to his sleeve and everybody watching. Then he got it out in pieces. I took $18 to tell a man what was going on under that woman's floor. Nobody moved. I got 4 kids, and I had no work, and I told myself it was a true thing I was saying. And it was true. And it was still. He stopped again. She come and got us. She come a half-mile in that. She got Ada, and she got the babies, and she got me. And I was the one done it. And she never said a word about it. Not one word. Not down there, and not since. Then he said the thing that finished it. I'd like to be the kind of man that don't need that to happen to him first. And he sat down. Marit Ashby was 3 rows back, with Nils asleep on her shoulder. She nodded. That is all she did. She nodded at him. And people have asked me my whole life why she did not say something. Why she did not stand up and forgive him properly. I have always given them the same answer. Because it was already done. She forgave that man at 8 o'clock at night on the 17th of January when she put her shoulder into a trapdoor. You cannot forgive somebody twice. Wickstrom repaid. It took him till the end of March. 17 households, and he went to every single one himself and sat at their table and put the money in their hand. I know because he sat at mine. He credited the interest properly and refigured every note going back. Marit Ashby's balance came down from $240 to $161 and some cents. He withdrew the filing on the 2nd of April. Solveig checked the courthouse book twice and then wrote to the clerk, and made him confirm it in writing, which is the most Solveig Halvorsen thing that has ever happened. He did not forgive the debt. She did not ask him to. She paid it off over the next 4 years out of egg money and mending and her sister's wages, and on the last payment in 1889 he wrote her a receipt, and they shook hands, and neither one of them said one word about January. He left in May of 1885, sold the store to a man from Deer Lodge, and went. Nobody ran him out. There was never a word said against him in public after that Sunday. He left because he had been seen. That is all that happened to Horace Wickstrom. 40 people who knew his name turned around in their pews and looked at him. It turned out that was enough. I could not dig under my house. My place sits on rubble stone, footing with no crawl space to speak of, and Marit came out and looked at it in April and shook her head. So she helped me build against the north wall instead. 3 feet down, banked with earth on 3 sides, sawn timber roof, stone-faced. About 7 by 9. Not as good as hers, and both of us knew it. I have slept in it every winter for 21 years. I am 86 years old, and there are people who will tell you an old woman does not need a root cellar to sleep in. I have outlived most of them. There is one more thing. She found it in May, the week after Wickstrom's wagon went down the road for the last time. She was in her father's trunk again. She was in that ledger constantly by then. Half the valley was building, and she took out his Norwegian hymnal, the one with the soft spine. Something was in it. A page. Cut close to the binding, 10 years folded into a hymnal. She sat down on the platform in that hollow with the lamp. And it was not a drawing. She turned it over twice to be sure. She had been so certain it would be the 2 pipes. The fix. The thing he worked out too late. It was 1 line, in pencil, in his hand, in Norwegian. Jordan berede når mennesker ikke gjør det. She had not read Norwegian since she was a girl, and she had to say it out loud twice to get it. The earth carries you when people do not. And that was when it happened. Not in the graveyard, in March of 1884, with 30 people watching her dry face. Not when she found the mortgage in the cupboard. Not in the snow with her son. Sitting on a stone platform in a room she had dug with her own hands, holding a piece of paper her father cut out of a book in 1875 because he could not stand to look at it. That woman put her head down on her knees and came apart. And she cried for Marit Ashby. For the first time. 11 months and change. She cried for a man who put their house on a table because he was too proud to say the word out loud and went up on a ridge in March to earn it back, and got 400 tons of snow on him for his trouble, and never got to explain, and never got to be forgiven, and never got to see his son walk. She cried until Solveig came down the ladder and found her, and that girl did not say a word. She sat down on the platform beside her sister, in a warm room under the ground, and put her arms around her and let her. Solveig Halvorsen never went to Bozeman. She married a schoolteacher named Aldous Brandt in 1890 and went down into Wyoming, and she carried a copy of that ledger with her. She has been teaching it 16 years now, Farm Hall's Grange meetings, a normal school in Laramie. How to read your ground, how to lean a wall, how to run 2 pipes so the air walks through, and she has never once let anybody call it hers. Every single time somebody stands up and says, "Mrs. Brandt, where'd you learn this?" she says the same thing. "It's not mine. It's a Norwegian stonemason's out of Telemark. His name was Torvald Halvorsen. He laid half the chimneys in a valley in Montana, and nobody in it ever asked him one question in 30 years. Niels Ashby is 22 and laying stone in Missoula. He never knew a thing about that winter. He was 14 months old. It was just where his family slept. And Marit is 44 years old, and she is in that cabin tonight. She paid it out in 1889, and she never married again, which was her own business, and I never asked her about it once. The rug came off that trapdoor after the first winter and never went back. It is just a room in her house, now the way you would have a pantry. Grandchildren will sleep down there in July someday because it is cool. I have been in it maybe 200 times, and I will tell you the thing I notice every single time. You put your hand on that wall, and it is not cold. Now, you remember what I told you at the start. 30 of us on a hillside in March of 1884, wind taking the words away. A widow with a dry face standing over a box with one boot in it. Cold, we said. We were wrong for 11 months. Not wrong for a minute. Wrong the way you are wrong about a whole person for the better part of a year while she is 9 feet under your feet, keeping 2 children alive. So I will only say this once, and then I am done. Do not ever tell me you are too old to be of use. I was 64 years old, and I could not lift a shovel. I never moved 1 ounce of that dirt. I could not have dug that room in 10 years. I complained about a stuffy room on Christmas Eve. That is all I did. I sat in a kitchen and grumbled about a lying-in room where they had rags in the windows, and 40 years of watching what happens to air when you shut people in a box came out of my mouth without me knowing it was in there. And a baby is alive because of it. That child is 22 years old, and he lays stone in Missoula. Nobody wanted my hands. Somebody needed what was in my head, and I did not know it was worth anything until it was out. You have got 40 years of something in you too. Somebody is going to need it, and they are not going to know to ask you for it. So you are going to have to be in the room. Be in the room. And the last thing I will say is about the ground. When every other soul in that valley built their walls higher and burned more wood and lost more toes, that girl was the only one who looked down. Down. At the dirt under her own floor. The oldest, plainest, cheapest thing there is. 50 degrees the whole way down forever. And it had been there the entire time. Under every single one of our houses. We just never thought to look, because we had all agreed a long time ago that the answer is up ahead somewhere, or up above, or coming in on the next train. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes it is under your feet, steady as anything, and it has been waiting there the whole while for somebody desperate enough or stubborn enough, and I was never entirely sure which one she was, to get down on her knees in the dark and put her hand on.